see if we can get everything working. Changed a few things. That's always anxiety-ridden because we never know if anything's going to work. What's going on with my mic? Interesting. Excuse me one moment while I fix this. Mic. Filter. Audio filter. Gain. Okay. Let's bring this up. About there. How's that? Oh, that's much better. Nice. Well, that could actually be higher. Hang on a sec here. Filters. Let's get this really high. Let's go 10. Close. How's that? That's better. Okay. Now we're hitting the right spots. Alright, that might be a little bit off, but we will see. Yeah, that's top of my register. Cool. Alright. Looks pretty good. Hopefully people will come on in and maybe I can hear it and see how it sounds in my head. Come on. Come on, come on, come on. That looks good. Alright, much better. Okay. Alright. So this is typically what for anybody who's new, there's a couple people filtering in that are kind of new. This is what the Wake Up With Me's usually are, is that we're going through, well, this is what it's become for now, because I'm working through Jonathan Little's Tournament Masterclass again. So we are probably about a good 40 episodes, maybe, well, 30 episodes into this. And we're getting there. We're about a third of the way through. It's over 180 hours of content. So reviewing it takes quite a while. And because we talk about it along the way. But should be able to finish it in the next month and a half or so. So this is the deep stuff. But there's no delay. So feel free to ask any questions you want. Feel free to ask me to go back. I don't care. This section is going to be a lot of fun because this is 3-bet pots as the preflop caller. These are the examples that we're going to be discussing. These are common spots, which is something I like that this site does, because it's silly to study the, rare occasions where you ran into some weird scenario. Like I always see people go, oh, I was in this hand and blah, 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 and this, that, and the other. And, it's just a weird scenario where somebody decided to 3-bet and they were wrong and then they hit the nuts on you, like something weird like that. But it's not worth studying. So stuff like this is, because we'll see these spots thousands of times as we play. So let me turn on the desktop. All right, and here we go.
Through a bunch of examples of 3-bet pots as the preflop caller. This is always a pretty difficult scenario, so we're going to go through lots and lots of examples. You raise the low jack, the button 3-bets, you call. So we're out of position in this scenario. Flop comes ace, 9, 3. We're going to check our whole range. Button bets 25% pot. Yuck. So this is a spot where we should substantially overfold. Ace, 9, 3 is one of these scenarios that is great for the preflop 3-better and terrible for the preflop caller. So let's just go through and naturally break down our range and see what we're looking at.
Preflop caller, typically because we're not going to have ace, king. At 40 big blinds, when we raise from the low jack and the button 3-bets, we're probably just going to jam. All these examples are going to be 40 big blind standard. So we're not going to have ace king in our calling range here. That's why you see it whited out. Ace queen's not doing great. It's a premium hand, but you can't really, do anything too fancy. You kind of just got to get it in. Hands like ace 10, second pairs of 9, things like that. He'll go through all this.
So in this scenario, when we are starting to get kind of shallow stacked due to starting with only 40 big blinds, let's just go through and make this scenario really clear. We raise to 2 big blinds pre-flop. They 3-bet to 5.5. We call. So the pot's already our 5.5, their 5.5, small blind, big blind ante. So that's like 13 big blinds. We check. They bet 4 big blinds, or 3 big blinds. 3 big blinds, right? In this scenario, they already have eight or nine big blinds out of their stack in the pot, something like that. So that means they have 32 left. At this point, it probably is fine just to start getting it in with our best hands, like decent aces and better. I understand we're running into their ace king and ace queen some portion of the time when we raise with our ace queen and ace jack, but I think that's probably going to be the right strategy because this is a spot where they are going to have some weaker aces that are going to be in a difficult scenario, and this is definitely a spot where they're betting with 100% of their range. And when they're betting with 100% of the range, I think it's fine just to raise your decently strong value hands that are happy enough getting it all in. So let's go through and categorize the range just very logically, very naturally. We have ace jack and better for values, probably just good enough to get in. Maybe ace queen and better is good enough to get in. Two pair sets are obviously good enough to get in. Marginal hands, other top pairs. Notice we don't really have a ton of them. And then I have all the nines, 9 eights. I have pocket eights here listed as a marginal hand. I think we could go down to like 7 sixes maybe, but that's pretty dicey out of position. I mean, eights could be a fold. Probably should just be a fold. It's close. Then we have what? What are our draws here? Ugh. Notice I also put some king high backdoor draw into the calling range. These are essentially like floats that are going to be in pretty bad shape going to the turn. They get to fold out.
Yeah, these are pretty much just there because they're defendable pre-flop, and you have to classify all the hands that you play pre-flop for a call after a 3-bet on the button in this position. But understand, these aren't draws. These are, I've had to learn this through, watching a lot of these, that sometimes you're classifying draws simply because you have to put the hand somewhere, and it's not junk, and it's not a marginal made hand. So you kind of have to classify the king jack as a, marginal made for a call, because you're basically floating, and then you're going to play it like it was a marginal made hand, something like ace 10. If you miss, there's bluffing opportunities. If the turn goes check, you can bet rivers a lot. It's very hard for somebody with a pair, higher than a 9, lower than an ace to call. So just understand when looking at these charts, that's where that comes from. This is the suited varieties, by the way. When we have 2 of the king queen, that's either clubs, diamonds, or spades. That's what we're talking about. Floating without that backdoor flush draw, it just kind of tightens your range up a little bit, allows you to not make this move too often. This is kind of like a limiting factor, like the fact that we know that straights get paid off more than flushes. Why not play all the connectors? Well, because if we play all the connectors, we're going to be in too many situations that are far too marginal. It's going to cost us too much in the long run in cash or tournaments. So if we go to just the suited connectors, the suited connectors, then we limit the amount of exposure that we have by decreasing that range. And as benefit, we also get a stronger hand pre-flop with the flush draw possible. So it's little things like that you have to realize when you go through these charts. I think that isn't explicitly explained, but it kind of becomes knowledge as you go on.
And I think that's fine. We definitely have to look hard to find draws in this scenario on such an uncoordinated board. So you're probably going to want to use the backdoor draws that cannot reasonably check call. I suppose if you told me you wanted to raise with like king 10 suited, king jack suited, etc., I think that's fine. 10-8 suited, sure, I guess if you wanted to. It's okay. But like these are not, none of these are great draws. I want to make that really clear. And also, this is an important point. When you're check raising some hands that could conceivably still be beat, like ace, queen, ace, jack, you do not want to have nearly as many draws. As you see here, it's a very, very low ratio of draws, compared to when your premium hands are just the super nuts and your draws also have lots of equity. Here, all of our premium hands that we're raising are not the super nuts, and also we completely lack equity. But we probably should put in some raises due to being out of position. You're going to find that in 3-bet pots and in all pots, you're just doing a whole lot more calling when you're in position and a whole lot more raising or folding when you're out of position. That said, we are still calling a decent chunk of the time. So let's take a look at what Solver does. Solver folds about 50% of the time as well. Solver actually picks the 4s, the 3s, and the 2s to raise as a bluff. I think that's interesting, kind of silly, but sure, why not?
He meant fives, fours, and twos.
So it picks fours and twos to go for the bluff. I think that's neat. Fives, fours, and twos.
And then the solver's doing that because it's finding ways in which we go for a bluff and then somehow backdoor a wheel. So little things like this come up. It's, like he said, very silly. It's the kind of thing where you have to be really sure your bluff's going to work. And if it doesn't, you've got that 3% chance of backdooring a wheel with a pair of fives.
It also elects to raise 9-8 and 9-7, which is also kind of interesting. So notice it's almost like using these marginal made hands as draws / value bets, which is an interesting strategy, something you're not going to see very often, I don't think. But this is because we're out of position and we're going to have a pretty tough time continuing on various turns and rivers. Notice solver thinks somewhere between ace-10 and ace-jack is good enough to get it in as well. He uses this random 6-5 junky backdoor draw as a bluff. So it's picking 5s, 4s, 2s, junky backdoor draws bluff instead of some of the draws I was electing to check raise with. I think you're probably going to find that stuff like Jack 10, Queen 10, etc. probably plays a little bit better. And notice the solver does call Jack 10 backdoor draw some portion of the time. And like King Jack, Queen Jack. So at least thinks those are reasonable, but elects to call it. But notice here again, I don't think the selection is all that relevant when it comes to which draws you're bluffing in this scenario. But I do think you definitely want to be raising with your decently strong made hands here and bluffing some portion of the time. Need to see it choosing these low pairs, though. It seems like the solver bluffs with the low pairs a little bit more than I do. More than is, I guess, logical in my mind, right? Because these are essentially like really, really bad draws. But hey, it's what it does. So I'm showing you what it does, right? All right, let's take a look at now. Same flop, but now we're in the low jack against the small blind. Okay, so we raise the low jack, small blind 3-bets we call. Ace 9-3, they bet small again. Now we want to be calling a ton. So we're going to go from folding out half the time when we're out of position on a pretty bad board for us to now calling substantially more due to being in position on a board that's also still not good for us. Also, I would generally recommend not raising now because we're in position again, right? You'll notice our range is a little bit different. We have a lot more suited aces, which is good. A lot of those essentially act as marginal hands. We don't need to raise to build the pot. Also, we don't necessarily want to raise any of our junky draws because they're fine floating. You're going to find that when you're facing this small 25% pot bet, you get to call a lot. So again, just go through, naturally break down your...
This is why the small bets work so great in the cash games, and I've been noticing it more and more lately, is because population makes the mistake that a bet is a bet. They're not realizing the size of the bet. So betting small on most flops, especially when you're the pre-flop raiser, it kind of allows you to bet at a greater frequency than population because population overfolds when you barrel turns. And you don't even have to adjust the size to be bigger. It just kind of third pot, 30, 40% pot, whatever. And I've been noticing getting a lot of folds in cash games. Tournaments, a little different. Tournaments, you have to adjust for pot size more because people are worried about running out of chips, but cash games, you can adjust down.
Your range, again, there's some line in these under pairs that you can call or fold. What a lot of people do wrong here is they, I don't know why I put jacks here. This was clear an oversight. This should have been call. 9 should have been a raise. Guess I got confused. This is a scenario where you're going to want to not really raise much of anything. Notice I have all of these premium hands listed as calls just because we don't really have any draws that want to or need to raise. Notice when we are floating, we're floating backdoor draws that have like either good backdoor straight draw, like 10-8 suited, or just like overcards to the 9, which I think is relevant. Everything else here I think seems logical. Again, jack should have been 9, so these should have been flip-flop, my bad. And so, yeah, we're calling a lot. Notice solver does roughly what we do, basically no raising. You don't really want to be raising when your opponent has the range advantage and that advantage when you're in position. You're really only raising when you're out of position in most of these scenarios. Notice solver also doesn't like these without a backdoor draw, or without a backdoor straight draw as well, but it does like these cards that like wrap around this 9. So you see like jack 10 sticking around, 10-8 sticking around, and really no raising because we're in position. All right, what about you raise, low jack, button 3-bets, we call, so we're out of position again. This is a spot where Again, we're probably going to check raise our best hands and draws due to being out of position. What are our best hands on Jack 10-5? Well, we have sets, but the sets is super nuts, so you probably don't need to raise that. You could, but I don't think you need to. And these top pairs are also probably just good enough to check raise and get it in. We also have some pretty junky draws that don't really mind check raising. These are going to be draws that wrap around the 10, wrap around the 5. So we see 8-6 and 7-6 backdoor draws I think are reasonable. Queen 9 and Jack 9. I don't think you necessarily want to be raising these better draws because these better draws can very confidently call a small bet. One thing I do want to mention, by the way, is that we are facing small bets in this scenario. That is generally across the board the GTO play. We already discussed this a little bit as the 3-better. And that's what's happening in most of these scenarios. When you are facing a small bet, though, you need to stick around a lot. If we were facing a pot-size bet because our opponent's just blasting it, well, now all of these junky draws would just easily get to fold out appropriately, right? But you see how, like, when you're facing a small bet, you really want to strive to stick around to the best of your ability. And that essentially results in you calling with some pretty weak hands. Like ace highs are fine, especially if that backdoor draws. So typically you're raising your best hands that don't mind protection, like ace 10, king 10. You're calling your best hands that don't really need protection, like tens if we had it, 5s and 2s, or if we had like 10-5 suited, we probably don't raise that either. And we're also raising some draws that lack showdown value. And to be fair, like this is what, 13% of hands? I don't think it's mandatory to raise this amount. Well, you'll see what the solver does. Maybe it has more or less in this scenario, but this is a spot where I think it is viable to do something like this. And solver does fold 30% of the time here. I was folding 30%. Good. Notice, again, this board's like a little bit better for my range because it connects with this board decently well, right? Just because we have a lot of random 10s and overcards with draws and whatnot. It's different than the ace 9 3 board that doesn't connect very well at all. So solver's actually raising a little bit more than I am. Notice it's raising 20% of the time. So it's just taking a lot of 10s and just getting them in, which, again, seems a little bit aggressive to me. What are the bluffs that the solver uses? It's using, well, not a lot. Ace queen, ace jack, which is kind of interesting. Again, the selection of draws that the solver chooses is always interesting in these 3-bet pots. I would literally never check raise ace jack here. Clearly I should, though. Notice solver also picks some cards that wrap around the 5, so a check raise is 5-6 and 8.
I mean, and this is getting into the implementable strategy of this little sliver of the fold versus the call versus the raise with ace jack. I mean, it's such a small amount that you can't make it implementable. It's just you're never going to know unless you have a read specific thing going on. So you're pretty much always just going to be on a call here. I mean, that's the implementable nature. But then you have hands like king 10 where it's about 50-50, where you're going to call and you're going to raise, about the same amount. So you can kind of pick your poison, I think I think the stage of the tournament kind of matters a lot in that scenario. Like if you're on the final table, maybe it's not a great idea to get it in for 40 big blinds. But if you're near the bubble, it might be because player might be over aggressive. If you're early in a tournament, probably is good. If you're still far away from the cash, especially if you're online and you can re-enter. Those are the scenarios, but it's all those, you have to kind of figure it out when you have marginal ones in there.
8-6 and 7-6 sometimes. Again, the selection of draws is interesting. Maybe I'm check raise bluffing a little bit too often in these spots, but I think it's fine. I guess it's a spot where it's okay to just check raise and get in your best hands. I know this feels kind of dirty in tournaments, but we are starting to get shallow stacked, right? And as you get shallower and shallower stacked, you must be willing to get it all in with your hands that are very likely good. If you do check raise like king queen, by the way, and you get jammed on, you have to fold. I want to make that clear. We're not check raising all in here. We're check raising small. So when we check raise small, you must be willing to fold your marginal hands like ace queen when you get raised. I typically go a little bit more polarized though, just to make my life easy, but that could certainly be the wrong strategy. Notice solver uses these small pairs every once in a while too. Also worth noting, notice here that solver's using a pretty linear strategy to check raise, again because the pot's already starting to get big in relation to our stack. If we were deeper stacked,
gotta remember this is like where we raised to like 2 blinds, let's say, and we got 3-bet to 6. or we went. It's probably more likely 2.5, and then we got re-raised to like 7.5, maybe 8. So there's, and then we called it. So then there's 15 in the pot, and we have 33 left. So getting a good hand like top pair, good kicker, or even a hand that we feel like our opponent dusts, when they bet a third of the pot, which is going to be about 5 big blinds, just calling that leaves us with 28 and puts 26 in the pot. So it's about a pot size bet. So check jamming here, even versus a 1/3 pot bet, isn't unreasonable, because it is a stack to pot ratio of 1-to-1. And when you have one pot bet left in your stack, getting it in is probably the best idea if you want to, get paid off. Obviously, with the monsters like pocket tens and things like that, you're probably going to have to trap. But when you have 10-9 suited here, like you have the 10-9 of diamonds on this board, it's probably good. Because your overall equity with your range base is 42%, which means the other player does have more equity than you, but he doesn't have a lot of stuff that can just call you. He has to have jacks, queens, kings, and aces reasonably to call you. But other than that, there's going to be some thinking involved,
Very sure the solver would be using the junky draws, like jack 8 suited more, instead of the 10s. But remember, as you get shallower and shallower, you can essentially just get it in lighter and with a more linear range. All right, let's take a look at low jack versus small blind. Okay, so re-raise low jack, small blind 3 bets, we call, flop comes 10-5-2, small blind bets 25% pot, as they're going to do with everything. And again, just go through and naturally break down your range. Jacks are pretty great, ace 10's pretty great. Aces and kings kind of fall in this category of pocket 10s, to the point that it's so good that it doesn't necessarily need to raise, and we are in position, so this is a spot where we are going to get to call very, very confidently. I think you're going to see this across the board. When we're in position, we just do a lot of calling, whereas when we're out of position, we do a lot of raising and folding. All this looks logical, right? The draws that we're opting to use are gut shot to backdoor draws, queen jack for overcards, king queen, we could probably raise that too if we felt like it. I think that's fine. Again, when we do get it in here.
Learning about the king-queen raising here on the draw versus the small blind is because it's great, because when we make top pair, it's usually good. But also, it's very hard for somebody with ace-king, ace-queen, ace-jack to continue. And we do have blockers to kings and queens. So it's very likely, unless we're just up against aces, that our opponent's not going to like getting check raised on this board when we hold king-queen, because we take away combinations of hands that can call. Hands like ace-king and ace-queen should call, but typically won't facing the check raise, especially when we're jamming, because that's pretty much all we can do. You notice that there's not an all-in size specified here, but like I said, 1-to-1 SPR. So yeah, you're probably looking to get it in here.
These hands are not necessarily the nuts, so we have to be a little bit cautious. Probably don't want to raise with a ton of bluffs. Let's see what solver does. Solver folds 37%. I was folding 28, so a little bit less than solver here. Kind of surprised to see the solver is folding so often, actually, to the small bet. But hey, that's what it's doing. I wonder where it's folding where I wasn't. Again, I want to make it clear that the solver's pre-flop range is not exactly the same as mine, so sometimes various boards line up slightly better for my range than the opponent.
It's interesting. Solver comes in with a half-pot raise, which in this scenario, let's say it was a small raise pre-flop. 2.5 made it 7. That's 14 plus blinds and ante's about 16. A quarter pot bet is 4. Calling that puts 24 in the pot, so a half pot bet is raising to 12, so plus 4 is 16. So we're talking about having check raising to 16 big blinds into a pot that has 20 in it already, plus our bet, and only having, what is that, 16, 23, only having 17 blinds left. So that's interesting, because that means it allows us to have a check raise fold range in this scenario. Now, obviously, we're not check raise folding anything with value, but it does open up the opportunity for when you have hands like the pocket sixes, right, that can check raise, and then if they get called and the turn is safe, they can jam and usually get folds. Or more likely what happens is the check raise half pot, you just get a lot of folds from hands that are unpaired. Ace king should still call, but people don't know that. And plus, in the real world, you're talking about somebody where the 40 is the effective stack. As long as you're not playing up against a much larger stack, and we're not the effective, if we're both about even, then it's kind of hard for ace king to continue with just airball and try to, bink when they know they're going to be facing an all-in on the turn. I mean, they know that when you make that bet. So, interesting.
Then the solvers. So solvers folding out various ace highs. Notice I was floating backdoor draws here. Maybe that was a bit of an error. So notice solver just folds out ace 9 backdoor flush draw, ace 6 backdoor flush draw. So that's 6 combinations of hands that I stick around. The solver doesn't. Solver just opts to raise ace 5. If it raises ace 5 here, it's getting it in. It can't fold. Same thing with ace 2, I think. It's kind of dirty if you raise ace 2. Maybe it's raising ace 2 looking to fold it. Solver's raising 22%. I was raising 15%. So solver raises a bit more than I do. Just going for a little bit of thin value, just getting it in with these hands, I presume. Also a few bluffs that it's raising. Notice again, these top pair marginal kickers seem to like to raise decently often. It's kind of interesting to see 9s and 8s raise. I'm kind of surprised those are raising, because when you raise and get shoved on or even called, I think you're really unhappy. But I suppose you just want protection in these scenarios. So anyway, that's what we're doing. Again, stats line up, or the general stats up here line up a little bit. Well, they're a little bit off in this scenario compared to what I was doing, but I think what we're doing here is fine and logical. In position, I think you get to float a lot. I think you get to float even more in position against players who don't play quite so well. So far, both the spots we've talked about are very uncoordinated boards where the pre-flop 3-better should be betting quite frequently. But let's talk about now a few spots where the pre-flop 3-better should often consider checking some of their range. Let's say you raise a low jack, button 3 bets, you call, king, queen 2. This is a spot where if you look at this range that we have, this lines up actually pretty great with this board, right? Like all of these middle high cards connect pretty well with this. So the pre-flop 3-better in position definitely has to at least be somewhat concerned and somewhat cautious here. So let's go through, break down the hands again. We have king, queen, and pocket 2s for the nuts. We have a lot of marginal made hands in, like ace, queen, ace, jack for a gut shot with overcard, ace 10, same story, king, jack, top pair, all these kings, top pair. These queens are all pretty decent. And then we have under pairs. Now, this is a spot where even facing a small bet, I think we need to fold out the under pairs.
Yeah.
They really just aren't going to realize their equity well at all. Maybe you can call like 9s and 8s with a spade. Maybe that's reasonable. But I don't really love it. I think we probably just
if you were
and then
like if you were like 5-handed on a final table, I could see that, but I mean, at an 8 or more ring, I don't know about calling the 9s and 8s. I think he's right with his initial reaction of just folding them out and just being like, well, fuck it,
What about our draws? Well, take a look at these draws we have. If you look at our draws, none of them really have great showdown value, right? So whenever none of your draws have great showdown value, you want to be raising the ones that are just happy enough getting it all in. That's going to be ace 9 suited, ace 8 suited, jack 9 suited, jack 10 9 suited, and jack 10 suited of spades. And then you want to be raising ones that can raise and then conceivably fold if they get jammed on. Like I think the jack 10 offsuits, well, jack 10 of hearts, right? Jack 10 of hearts probably wants to raise and then fold. And then we're just going to call the ones that are...
Which means the jack 10 of diamonds doesn't want to fold. Jack 10 of clubs wants to fold because there is no backdoor potential for the club draw should you miss your straight. Having those extra diamonds, like when you have the jack 10 of diamonds on this board, having those as an extra way to get out, picking up just the 3 of diamonds on the turn. I mean, now you've just got, you've got 15 outs instead of 9. I mean, it's just such a huge thing. I mean, it increases your equity 50% when the next card comes off. And when the next card comes off, your straight equity goes down 50%. So you start out on the flop, with 8 outs, you're talking about 32%, 33% approximately. On the turn, if you get no help, you go down with 1 card to come to about 17, 18%. So, or 17, 16%. So you drop in half. When you pick up the diamond draw, you actually only go to, what is that? 9 outs for the diamond and 6 outs more for the straight that don't have the diamond. So wait a minute, no, that's 6. That's 4 more outs. So you go up to 13 outs, so you still have 26%. So, you know, that's the difference in the backdoor draw, is an extra 10% to win when you have to get it in. You know?
Are essentially getting the right odds to continue, which are all the other flush draws. Notice I don't really think we need to continue backdoor flush draws here from out of position. It's just not going to work out well to check call out of position with 8-7 on king, queen, 2. So again, overfolding a little bit, but I think this is probably acceptable and fine. And again, overfolding, 42% for the solver.
Plus, there's the human logic factor with the Jack-10 there on the King-Queen board, is that you don't have all your outs. Typically, unless you're up against King-Queen and you get it in, which is probably the best scenario for you, usually you're getting it in versus Ace-King, Ace-Queen, Ace-Queen with the backdoor flush draw, things like that. So you have less outs because your opponent's going to hold one.
Solver, I was folding 43%, so good. Solver raises 10%, I was raising 10%. Sometimes it works out. Slightly different selection of hands for me in the solver to raise. Solver is also raising mostly the best draws. 10-8 suited every once in a while, I suppose. It doesn't raise Jack-10 suited ever. I guess it just thinks it's so good that it can easily call. It does raise slightly weaker with like King-Jack and King-10 and pocket aces when it has it. But again, I think this looks pretty nice. Let's say you raise the low jack, small blind 3 bets. We call. Here's the flop. Opponent bets. This is a spot where we're going to be calling by defending a ton. Notice now I think these spades and even like jacks, 10s, 9s are good enough to call in this scenario because we are in position. In position, you should be calling a lot. Again, I think we probably do want to just raise our absolute best hands and our nut draws that can happily get it in. If I had to guess, we're probably going to see the solver raising off and calling off hands like King 10 maybe King 9, just because they think it's good enough. Probably not going to raise aces and kings. Those are probably just fine enough to get in. Maybe it raises aces. Wouldn't be shocked. But then also just a ton of calling, right? In position here, we get to call a ton. 25%, basically 25% pot bet. In position, you have to stick around a lot. So here I'm folding 20%. Solver folds out same, right? So notice it sticks around a lot too. We were correct that solver just raises the top pairs that want protection and the draws down here. Interesting, solver does not raise king queen, so that's kind of cool. So kind of surprised to see that. I was raising those. You know, I think it's okay. I think it's okay to just raise top 2 pair and bottom set. I like raising bottom set here because whatever the opponent has that has some equity is usually in pretty decent shape and it's probably not folding a ton. So like, this is one of these spots where when you're playing against a perfect GTO opponent, maybe you are supposed to just slow play the pocket 2s, but against a real world opponent, if you give them ace king or king jack or ace queen, they're probably just not going to fold to a small raise, and you're going to be able to put them in a pretty miserable spot. But yeah, interesting to see that here solver again uses kind of like low equity value hands that aren't folding, but then also like very, very good draws that have lots of equity, right? So it's interesting to see the mix of a mix that the solver uses when it comes to value hands to draws. Like either it's raising very linear, but hands that could still be beat, or it's raising like super polarized where it's super nuts or junky draws, or it's raising, again here, kind of linear where the draws it's raising also have pretty great equity, like, you know, ace-high flush draw.
And this is because the solver doesn't have implementable strategy. The solver doesn't win tournaments. The solver gives you a generally correct method of play. You as the human being have to come in with what the truth is. This is like the debate we got into the other day on Hold'em being solved. Limit Hold'em is solved because there is an actual, because of the fixed betting size, there is an actual, yes, you should raise or call or fold here for every single situation. It does not exist for No Limit Hold'em because you can bet a quarter, you can bet half, you can bet a third, you can bet 23% of the pot. You know, you can bet 84% of the pot. So because of these things, these are all factors that come into, these are generalized things. So like, you're not going to see a lot of players betting a quarter pot at the stakes I play. It's going to be a third of the pot is the lowest one. More sophisticated players will do it, but there's not a lot at the stakes I'm playing right now. So our solver adjustments have to be better. We know the general rules on the solver, you know, versus perfect population GTO play, but population doesn't play perfectly. Population bets more of a third pot here at the stakes I play. So that's where your adjustments have to come in. Just something to always point out.
All right, so now what about you raise low jack, small blind 3-bets, we call, and now they check the flop. So this is a spot we haven't talked about quite yet. Now, we are going to want to be betting with a generally polarized range. So again, just straight up go through, categorize the hands as it makes logical sense. That's going to have us betting decent top pairs and better. Premium made hands we can happily get it in with. Checking the marginal made hands, queens, under pairs, etc. And then betting our draws. And you typically want to be betting.
Betting the deuces here is super important, by the way. I just want to point it out because you have a monster that is completely disguised and it can only really be beaten by another monster. If you check, your opponent can actually have ace-jack and ace-10 here and fill his gut shot for free. But when you bet, and bet enough to commit the other player, meaning only a third pot, they're probably just going to give those hands up or maybe take one card off. But betting the deuces here is so important.
In this scenario with most of your draws, I think that's fine. If you bet them and get raised, you can fold out the weak ones, call the good ones. The good ones are flush draws. If you bet and get jammed on, you can also call off with the nut flush draws, fold the weaker ones, like 9-8 of spades. And I think if you have ace-jack or ace-10 with a spade, it's probably fine just to go ahead and bet it. Seems reasonable to me. Notice here this gives us a pretty nice breakdown, premium made, draw, marginal made junk. So I like this a lot. This seems very, very clean and logical to me. So we had, 38% betting. Solver bets right at the same amount. Good. Sometimes it lines up. You'll see Solver does random stuff like betting all in every once in a while. I would just tell you never to do that for simplicity. So Solver bets its best hands, right, for the most part. Notice these are likely to backdoor draws, almost certainly. Solver picks 5s, 4s, 3s again to bluff. Again, this is something I'm typically not doing in practice, but hey, I could definitely be convinced that this is something we need to amend if we were to really try to drill down and play closer to GTO. It's kind of interesting whenever you're looking at these spots. We'll take a look at some more spots where the solver checks and see what it recommends. But interesting to see 5s, 4s, 3s, 2s betting this flop. I suppose it's just because the solver is looking for draws. Notice it doesn't bet draws that it doesn't want to get check raised off of, like Jack 10. So that's something we should definitely take away from this. Solver does not bet draws it doesn't want to get check raised with, and it does bet draws it doesn't mind getting check raised with. So that's cool. Notice Solver's betting, I guess that's about half of them. That makes sense. Solver bets Queen 10 and Queen 9. I'm kind of surprised to see the strong but obviously marginal hands betting, but hey, Solver does some fun stuff. All right, let's take a look at a different scenario. You raise low jack, button 3-bets, we call out of position again. 8, 7, 4, we check, they bet 25% pot. This is, again, another board that lines up well enough with me. Notice we have these sets, we have straights, we have draws as well, but I think this is a scenario where we probably just want to do a lot of calling. I suppose we could raise with our best hands that don't mind protection, like ace-8, pocket 9s. But notice here, 8, 7, 6, 5, and 4s are just the super nuts. So when you just have the super nuts, you definitely don't want to be raising, even out of position, even on a kind of coordinated board, because it's just really easy for your opponent to have nothing, right? If they're sitting here with like king, queen offsuit, I mean, what are they going to do, right? They're just going to fold every time. So I think you want to do a lot of calling here. The only hands I think the solver may opt to raise here are going to be the vulnerable ones, like ace-8, pocket 9s, like we saw earlier, right? Top pair, marginal kicker was raising when we were out of position. We do have some draws that don't mind raising. Notice overcards with backdoor flush draws and flush draws. Also Jack 10, Jack 9, 10, 9 are draws that may not mind raising. If I had to select some draws to raise, it'd probably be the... Well, it depends on what I'm raising with, right? If I'm raising with 8, 7, 6, 5, and 4s, then the draws you can pick to raise are going to be really junky, like really, really bad, like Queen 9 backdoor draw. But if we're raising ace-8 suited and pocket 9s...
Oh, man, I am hungry and tired, so we're going to try to get through this pretty reasonably.
The draws we're going to raise are going to be the really high equity ones, like the good suited kings, maybe even suited aces, because they have decent equity and they can still call it off. So notice here again, I'm doing a lot of calling out of position just because the draws I want, or sorry, the premium hands I want to raise are the super nuts, and you don't really want to raise the super nuts. So solver raises 13% here. Let's take a look at what it is raising. It's raising 2 pair when it has it. Did I have 8-7? I had 8-7 selected as marginal made. We should have put this as premium. That was an oversight. My fault. 8-6, that top pair and gut shot again, huh? So 8-7 makes sense. It's strong but vulnerable. Pocket 9's and ace-8, we called that one. Aces raises some, 4s raises some, sure. And then the draws it picks, I think I said what, ace highs and king highs. So it opted to use queen highs as the raises. And king jack offsuit randomly. Figure that one out, huh? Okay. I mean, sure, it makes sense. I was folding out 20, so I was folding slightly more than the solver at 27. Solver folds out 23. Kind of rough to see some ace high. I guess I fold some ace highs too. So, I mean, okay. It all lines up pretty nicely. Let's take a look at you raise low jack, small blind 3 bets we call. So now we're in position again. Here we're not going to fold very often at all. I can already tell you that. Again, take a look at our range. We have lots of good draws, premium hands, etc. Do we want to raise now? So now we have many more premium hands that don't mind protection. But again, I think this is going to be one of the spots where we're really not so concerned about being outdrawn. Also, the draws we have are getting really good odds to call. So if we're going to raise, we're probably going to pick some really bad hands to raise again. But we don't have a lot of obvious ones. Like if I had, I don't know, Jack 6 suited in the range, I'd probably raise that one. But we don't have Jack 6 suited, right? Our only 6s, aces, and pocket 6s. So I think we just want to do a lot of calling here again. Maybe, I mean, again, I can pretty much guarantee if we looked at the solver, it's probably going to say to raise like, 10s and 9s. Maybe it's going to say to raise bottom set type hands here. Something like that.
Yeah.
But I'm going to do a lot of calling in this scenario because, like, if you raise jacks and get it in and raise 10s and get it in, I'm not sure we're loving it in this scenario because this is a spot where the opponent's going to start betting pretty polarized. I mean, don't forget, right? The opponent's not betting 100% of the time. So when the opponent doesn't bet 100% of the time, you have to be a little bit more cautious raising. If you knew that your opponent was just going to continuation bet 100% of the time with everything, then you can probably raise a little bit wider. Anyway, I'm only folding 14% of the time here. I want to make that clear. It's like almost none. And turns out solver folds almost none as well. If solver does raise, there you go, 10s and 9s, right? 6s raises for a gut shot. That's cool. Sets never raise. So that's fine and good.
Trying to see
not a ton of raising going on really though. Notice only 10%.
The 6s call or fold ratio raise 100% pot. Raise 100%. Interesting. It's more raising and calling than folding.
Calling's probably
which I guess makes sense.
Notice king queen calls a lot, like even more than just with spades. With a spade, like king is basically saying sometimes I'm going to call like king of hearts, queen of diamonds, which is pretty loose. I don't think I was doing that. I wasn't doing it. I was only calling with king queen with a spade, which is still pretty loose. But again, this is what happens when your opponent bets small, right? You got to float a ton. It again doesn't think aces and kings need to raise for value or for protection. Okay, cool. All right, let's take a look at one more scenario where the opponent checks. You raise low jack, small blind 3 bets. We call. Flop comes 10, not 10-5-2. What am I saying? Let's see. 8 of diamonds, 7 spades, 4 spades. There we go. Small blind checks. All right, now we have to decide what we want to bet with. This is a spot where I do think we want to be betting pretty frequently. We definitely want to be betting like any reasonable draw. We want to be betting all of our made hands that don't mind protection. Maybe even we want to be betting stuff like king 8 and queen 8. I could be convinced of that.
Yeah.
In terms of draws that I'm betting, in 3-bet pots, as stack to pot ratio gets shallower, the draws that you're going to bet, you want to make sure that they can withstand a flop check raise or have an easy fold. Like if you bet king queen with a spade here and get raised, you can just fold, right? If you bet king queen of spades though and get raised, you're not folding. If you bet
oh,
there's already water in here.
ace 2 of diamonds for a backdoor draw, you can fold if you get raised. If you bet ace 2 of spades, you don't fold. So make sure you're aware of what you're doing with these draws when you do bet them. And this all looks nice to me. We have nice marginal made to junk range when we are checking. Whenever you are checking, again, you always want to make sure you have that 70-30 ratio, if at all possible, and we definitely have it here, especially when we're in position. So I like this. This seems nice. Let's see what solver does. We were betting roughly 50%. Solver's betting 60%, so even more than I am. What's Solver doing differently than me? Again, it's different because the ranges are slightly different, but
Yeah.
Solver bets 6s and 5s for gut shots.
Yeah, I
plus
actually
pair.
like
It's
that. I
interesting.
mean, when you get 3-bet and get checked on here, it's a rare player that's doing that with, the overpair. Obviously, if you if you raise and get jammed on, you can be in bad shape. But a lot of times we're just going to be up against another draw. So, having the showdown value of the pair of 6s with the gut shot, it's kind of really good. Same with the 5s.
It's a hand I'm typically not betting. Solver bets a lot of the 8s, so I mean, I speculated King 8 and Queen 8 may bet, but it's even betting more for value / protection, which makes logical sense. I would have clearly no problem with that. Solver also picks these various draws to bet. Notice Solver does not bet 10-9, Jack-9, and Jack-10 because it doesn't necessarily want to get check raised off of these. This would be pretty bad to bet Jack-9 and get check raised off of it, so that makes sense, right? When Solver's bet...
It's kind of the same logic of not betting the ace-6 suited, you know what I'm saying, or the ace-5 suited. But you see the ace-4, we don't mind because we're getting in the ace-4 suited. We're getting in the ace-3 suited, with the flush draws, backdoor straight draws, things like that, because they have... pretty much all they have going for them is the draw. The ace-5, ace-6, you are the flush. The ace-5, ace-6 also have the immediate, outs of hitting a 6 or a 5 and making a straight, which is super disguised. So that's a draw that's super powerful. Like, you get 3-bet in this pot, call it off, and then check flop, or check call a bet, or the small blind bets, and you call the flop, and then a 5 comes off on the turn. Realistically, what your opponent's not going to sit there and say, well, he actually has ace-6 and 6s in this spot, when you could very easily have the ace-6 of spades. I mean, it's one of those ones where you'll see me do this in cash games where I'll go, the only way this guy has me beat is if he has this one specific hand. And when that's the case, they're usually bluffing, and then you call it, and it turns out to be like 50-50. They're usually, bluffing, but when they do have this in their range, it'll be there about half the time. So this is one where you just get paid all the way off when a 5 or a 6 comes and you have the one-liner straight, because then your opponent's going to check, and you can just bet like half pot or maybe even less than that, maybe around 40%, and they're just going to sit there going, what 6s does this guy have other than pocket 6s? And most people think you're supposed to fold that, which you're absolutely not, as we know.
Betting, typically it's betting hands. It does not mind having raised. So like right here, you see like ace-6 of spades is betting, but ace-6 offsuit's not betting, just like I was doing, I'm sure. It's like ace-6 of spades is betting, the other ones are not betting. Like I recognize here, you don't really want to get check raised off of ace-6, but actually I had these in the checking range. Never mind, that made sense. We actually already got that right, so good. What else? Solver's doing a little bit more betting with overcards than I was, I think. Like, it's just betting all king jacks instead of the king jack with spades. Anyway, good. This all looks fine and good to me. So anyway, that's a bunch of examples in 3-bet pots. I know this is a pretty dicey spot to play. I know we're starting to deviate from what the solver does a little bit. That said, our ratios are usually still pretty much in line, just using good, reasonable logic. And if you can use good, reasonable logic at the table, and even away from the table, to come up with some play that is viable and reasonable, you're going to be in fine shape against basically everyone. One thing I also want to point out here, notice 3s and 2s bet again. Maybe this is just a common pattern. You have to delve into that a little bit deeper. But in 3-bet pots, in position, they check to you. Maybe you're supposed to bet the under pairs. Because remember, that's the spot I was looking at a second ago. Right here, right? Notice 5s, 4s, 3s. We're betting king, queen, 2. Same spot here, right?
I think that's because Solver realizes that the GTO play, when a person hits that board of king, queen, or is very unlikely to hit this board of 8-7, they're just going to be sitting there with a couple big cards in their hands that don't really do much. So your hand is good, but it's one of those ones that if you just check it, you can be easily outdrawn, and you don't really have premium value where you can even let a card come off, like like a top pair ace-8 kind of thing, like where now if an ace comes off, you're just minted and the other guy thinks he's good because the flop went check and he has ace-king. But I think betting in those scenarios is important because you'll see players 3-bet a lot. I do it where you 3-bet from the small blind, the flop totally misses you, but you make your your c-bet continuation with range, and then the other player raises you, and you sit there and go, well, shit, this is a range bet, so he's obviously got something and you just get out of the way. And it really doesn't even matter in that scenario. If your opponent was to raise you and then show you that they had pocket fives, you'd still be faced with the fact, holding ace king in your hand, that you have to outdraw that hand to win the pot. So it really doesn't matter what they have as long as they have gained showdown on this flop or not lost any ground on their hand, because pre-flop, ace king versus the fives, it's 45-55. On this flop now, the ace king only has 6 outs. You're talking 24%. So these bets, that's if you see the whole board. It's 12% immediately. So when you face those bets, it's a super scary scenario. So I really like stuff like this in the solver. This is stuff that I have latched onto. And it was evident the other night playing that final table. There was a lot of scenarios like this where I was on the other end and had to give up good hands that I had 3-bet. But when we got to be about 5-handed, I started getting in the exact opposite scenario, because obviously you're out of position more 5-handed than you are 8-handed, just because there's less spots on the table. So defending my blinds more frequently, I ended up check raising quite a few more spots like this with the underpair. And I remember reactions in the chat just like, what the fuck are you doing? And then it's like you just get the fold, because it's like the other guy's just sitting there with napkins and you actually have showdown value, and eliciting that pressure on them, especially at a final table, makes them go back to ABC. Like, no matter how fancy somebody is or how advanced they are, when they're facing a obviously solid bet with showdown value versus their hand, the first reaction is to fold. Very rarely you'll see people just abandon it and be able to figure out your hand might be strong enough now but weak enough overall that they can jam on you and now you have to fold. But you don't see that stuff very much, especially at final tables.
8-7-4, 3s and 2s are betting sometimes. Anyway, cool spot. It's good to see some of the hands that the solver uses as bluffs that perhaps don't fit nicely into our premium made hand draws, marginal made junk categories. Like, I don't view pocket 2s as a draw here, right? But solver is betting it. And whenever you are looking hard for bluffs, makes sense, right? You bet the 2s. If you get raised, you can easily fold. Whereas if you bet Jack 10 or 10-9 and get raised, it's not quite an easy fold, right? So it makes sense that solver looks for that, and we should probably be doing that too. But anyway, there's a bunch of examples. I learned a little bit. Hope you did too.
I think it's one of those ones where the pocket 2s, it is a junk hand, so you're bluffing with it, but it's also a junk made hand. You know what I'm saying? So, like, you do have showdown value. If the board runs out, 9-10, and you're up against ace king with the pocket deuces, you win. So it's, I guess you could classify that as junk made. So like it can win, but not likely. Usually these are check down hands like ace king. We classify that as marginal made with no pair, but versus a 3-better, that hand becomes, I guess, made junk hand. So very easy to get away from, but also has showdown value. So let's do the quiz here. I can't imagine what this quiz is going to be. When facing a 3-bet on this board, you'll raise more often on the flop if you're in position against a 3-better. Out of position, you're going to be checking and raising more. So I would say this is false. Yeah. Out of position, you want to just be done with the hand or be committed to the hand. When you're facing the low jack, facing a 25% pot bet from the button. Well, when you're in the low jack, facing a 25% pot bet from the button on this board, and you are 5-5 to deuce-deuce, good check raise. Are they good check raising candidates? Well, according to Solver, they are. Yeah. Very difficult to find draws in this board, so you should use your small pairs with some frequency that can turn straight, so you have 2 clear outs that make the nutted hand. Right, so this is like a kind of like a bluffy draw. This is a tough scenario. This scenario is so tough because you have to look very hard for what hands you have that can play this way. And you have to remember that even hands with showdown value do play as draws and bluffs sometimes. So it's kind of that marginal junk category. When you're in the low jack facing a 25% bet from the button on this board, what should you do with 8-8? I believe it's a fold. I believe Solver said that sometimes it's a call, but I think it's just overall, it's just a fold. Yeah. When you're in the low jack facing a small blind check on 8-7-4, what bet size should you use? I mean, typically, you're in position. It's a it's a higher, or it's a lower frequency board. So I'm guessing high. No. You want to bet small and frequently with a wide range of, oh, because because your range is wider because you're on the low jack. I fucked that up. Okay, makes sense. Yeah, the standard is small, out of position big. Yeah. All right, cool. We're gonna mark this as complete. Finally, it took 4 sessions to get through this little section because it was so dense. This is one of those ones where I'm gonna keep it at just this section for this episode, because this is one that I'm personally going to upload to YouTube and then download to my phone so I can re-listen to this when I'm in the gym. This was super dense, just these 4 spots, but it's very common, and 3-betting now is so much more common that you have to kind of dive into the minutia to realize how to deal with it. Just the difference between 2 years ago, how many 3-betting we saw pre-flop versus now is just, it's got to be 50% more or more. All right, the next section, 4-bet pots as the pre-flop aggressor. That'll be fun. And as the caller, 4-bet pots. That'll be fun. Those are always great because it's usually very linear or very tricky. So we'll see. And I'm going to go ahead. I'm not going to rate out anybody. There's not really anybody on, I think, that I'd like to rate out. Plus, there's not too many people here, so... I'm going to go ahead and kill it. I'll be back later to play. I'm not sure yet. I'm thinking tournaments, but I want to eat and go to the gym and see how I feel. So it might just be a cash game day depending on my energy level. But I'll see you guys later. Thanks for hanging out. This is one you're going to have to watch through a couple times. So feel free. There's a great program that I use called WinX YouTube. It's a YouTube downloader. So this is one that I'm going to download to my phone and listen to a few dozen times. So I would suggest you do the same. See you guys later.